cactus and succulent growers, I'm Lynn and welcome to Desert Plants of Avalon. And in today's video I'm going to be talking about the correct watering for your Schlumbergera cacti, commonly known as the Christmas and Thanksgiving cactus. Now here are some of my Schlumbergeras here in the kitchen that are all coming into bud and have been blooming already. And with the watering, I have to mention a few things first. And the first one is that there are two main groups of Schlumbergera. The first one will be the Schlumbergera bucklei, which is the true Christmas cactus because it has the scalloped leaves. And this one is one that comes into bud a bit later than the more commonly sold Thanksgiving cactus, the Schlumbergera truncata. And this one here is the more commonly one that is often sold as Christmas cactus, but it is more of the Thanksgiving cactus because it has the crab claw leaves. And this is Schlumbergera truncata, and this one usually is the one that comes into bud and bloom a month or so earlier than the true Christmas cactus. And by the way guys, if you want to know if you have a true Christmas cactus or you have the more commonly sold Thanksgiving cactus that is often sold as a Christmas cactus, do check out a video I've made on how to tell the difference between a Christmas and a Thanksgiving cactus, and I'll link that video up above. And the reason why I mentioned about the two main groups is because it can vary a little bit, and even especially with their flowering. Now, Schlumbergera are epiphytic cacti. They're often known as the holiday group of cacti. And by epiphytic, I mean that in their natural habitats, they grow hanging from trees, usually in rainforests with much higher humidity. So desert cacti are totally different in their care requirements to these Schlumbergera cacti. You'll often hear in my videos when I'm talking about watering cacti to give them a dry and cool winter rest, no watering over the winter time. However, with Schlumbergera, because they're epiphytic and they're winter flowering, they do need watering over the winter time, and this is why I wanted to do this video, because they're totally different watering schedule completely to the desert type of cacti. First of all, these Schlumbergeras have two types of growing seasons. The first one is obviously they come into bud and bloom anything from mid-September up until the end of February. The true Christmas cactus tends to come into bloom and bud and bloom a bit later than the Thanksgiving cacti, but they're classed as late fall, autumn, winter bloomers. So they're actively growing now when they're flowering. And then their other growing season will be obviously in the springtime, which is with a lot of plants. From usually the April time to the September time, they focus their energy on producing new leaves, such as these. And the leaves are actually called clades, C-L-A-D-E-S. They're modified leaves, different to leaves on normal houseplants. So they focus their energy in producing these new little clades. And this is from the April to the September. Then from sort of early September, mid-September, even the October, they then put their second growing season into producing buds and blooms. And when it comes to the watering, now obviously as I mentioned, the growing season for their new leaves, their clades, starts usually from the April time. And I would water these Schlumbergera cacti from the April time, pretty much like I'd water houseplants. Again, totally different to how I'd water the desert cacti. I would give them a good watering, and then I'd let the soil, the top surface of the soil, dry out before I'd water them again. So I can't say I water once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week. It really does depend on when the top surface of the soil dries out. And by the top surface, I mean roughly about 3 centimetres to 5 centimetres deep down. When that's dry, I'll then water again. And I'll give them a good watering. I won't let them sit in wet soil, just enough watering to dampen the soil, because these plants are cacti, and they do store water in their leaves, so they don't like to be growing in boggy, damp soil, even though they're rainforest cacti. So from April until the September, I water them every time the soil has dried out, after the top surface of the soil has dried out. But don't let them go too long in between periods of water, because they do need regular watering. And I'm going to talk about the fertilising before I talk about the autumn full watering. I would give these cacti, these Schlumbergeras, a fertilising from the April up until early September. And I would fertilise them with every 3 to 4 waterings that I give to them. So every 3rd to 4th watering. And you laugh when I tell you this, guys, because I don't use traditional cactus fertiliser, although you can. I would use tomato feed, and I would use the tomato feed at half of the strength that they recommend using for tomatoes. So I'd use tomato fertiliser at half strength with every 3rd to 4th watering I give to these stunners. And the reason why I use tomato feed is because the high potassium really does help to encourage more buds and blooms in the fall time and the winter time. From April up until the September, the regular fertilising with the tomato feed, the potassium will build up in their leaves. So not only does it help produce lovely, healthy clayed leaves, but it also gives much more possibilities of more buds and blooms. So you need to start that up from the April time when they're coming into their active growth again with the tomato feed. And I have made a video on why I like to use tomato feed with cacti and succulents. So for more information on that, do check out a video I've made on why I like to use tomato feed for fertilising my cacti and succulents. Link to that video will be up above. Now with the watering, it's always best to use room temperature water. These type of cacti, these Schlumbergeras, are not too fussy whether you use rainwater or you use tap water. However, if you live in an area where you have very hard water, tap water, and it's very high in lime, it is best to use rainwater if you've got access to clean rainwater, because hard tap water these plants don't particularly like. But in my experience, I've lived in different areas, even when there's hard water, they're not too fussy. Just make sure that the water is at room temperature, because icy cold water straight out the tap can shock them. Let the water sit for about 24 hours to allow any of the nasty chemicals to dissipate as well. So then, how do I water them? From April until the end of their flowering, I will water these, as I mentioned, every time the top surface of the soil has dried out. And I stop fertilising them from the September, even though I'll be regularly watering, because they've got enough potassium build up for their flowering. Then I will not totally stop watering, but I would certainly dramatically reduce the amount of watering I'd give these Schlumbergeras when they're coming to the end of their flowering season. For example, this is my Schlumbergera truncata, and although it's still in flower, there's no more new buds on this. It's clearly coming to the end of its flowering season. So I've dramatically reduced the amount of water now. I'm letting the soil dry out that bit longer in between watering. And you can dip your fingers into these to check how dry it is. You can dip it right in and you will know then, that's still slightly damp, so it's okay. But then once it goes that bit drier, I leave it to a bit longer in between waterings before I will start them. And the reason for that is because these cacti do have a bit of a rest period once they're flowered. They don't want to be kept regularly watered because they will naturally shut down. They put a lot of their energy into producing buds and flowers, and they need a reduction in watering over the rest of the winter until the April to sort of allow for their little winter rest. They don't have a totally dormant rest like the desert cacti would do, but they do like a dramatic difference in watering. So go that bit longer. I would probably give these, from when they stop flowering, I would just give them a water probably once every 2 to 3 weeks. But it does depend on temperature and things like that. Make sure that the surface of the soil, at least quarter of the way down, stays dry before watering again. If you stop totally watering and the soil is very, very dry, then they can drop a lot of clades, the leaves. So you want to still keep them a little bit regularly watered, but dramatically reduce it to let them have their rest. And while I'm talking about that, it is perfectly normal for your cactus, once it has come to the end of its flowering, to go very limp. The clade leaves on these Schlumbergeras will droop down. I notice it with a lot of mine. They will droop and hang saggy. And the first thing you think is, I'm not giving it enough water or it's dying. But this is normal because Schlumbergera are having their rest after they've flowered. So they will droop. They've put their energy to producing flowers. Let them drop. Don't panic. And don't water more just because you see this. As I say, let the soil dry out more in between waterings. I've made a special video on why your Schlumbergera, Christmas and Thanksgiving cacti, go limp after they've flowered, and I explain in there a lot more detail, so do watch that video after this one. I'll link that video up above. It explains all in there. And then I just want to mention as well as the watering, it's also a good idea because, as I mentioned, these are epiphytic cacti. They do like higher humidity than desert cacti. So if you're growing these plants in the house, a very common house plant, then you want to make sure that you mist regularly with the leaves. And I would mist these from the April all the way, or pretty much all the way through, literally every day with a light spray of mist. I'd spray them all. So then I hope you found that video useful on how to water your Schlumbergera, totally different to the desert cacti. And I just want to mention I've made quite a series of videos on Schlumbergera cacti. And one is how to get more blooms on your Schlumbergera. So do check out that video if you want to know how to get more blooms on your Schlumbergera cacti. I'll link that video up above. And I've also made a video in a lot of in-depth detail on how to actually care for Schlumbergera, and I mentioned a lot of things in that video. So do go and watch that one if you're new to these cacti and you want to know how to care for them. Link to that video will be up above. So then guys, are your Schlumbergera blooming gorgeous at the moment? And do you water yours in pretty much the same way I've mentioned now? Let me know in the comments down below. And do leave a comment, even a heart or a smiley face, because every comment really helps the algorithm. Do subscribe if you haven't done already, and check my website out for lots of regular blogs on how to care for different types of cacti and succulents on there. And desertplantsofAvalon.com. And I want to wish you all a fantastic cactus-powered day.